Welcome to Lancaster Environment Centre, Lancaster University, and part one of our January 2022 departmental conference. Held online, Next Steps in Research celebrated researchers studying the next steps for peoples and societies, and those taking their next steps in project development. As many of us are working from home at the time of recording, you might find it helpful to switch on subtitles or closed captions, where our speakers were managing with the background noise and variable internet speeds of domestic life. This video is a recording of conference session 1 with speakers Nadia von Benzon, Shane Rothwell and Malika Mezeli presenting and taking questions from the online audience. If you've got questions for the speakers, you can find links in their contact pages in the video description, along with a link to the full conference programme. As Nadia will explain, her presentation features images and descriptions associated with birth and newborn children. So if you might find that difficult, you're very welcome to skip ahead to the second chapter of the video. Now, having said all of that, I'll hand you over to Professor Oliver Wild, our Associate Director for Research here at LEC and Chair of our conference.
So we have 3 talks in this session for the break. And we're going to kick off with Nadia von Benzon. We're going to talk a little bit about her project on baby steps. So over to you, Nadia.
Thank you very much, Oliver. And thank you so much for the invitation to speak. Can I be heard okay?
Yes, it's fine at the moment.
Great. And is that screen sharing happening?
That's fine.
Is that right? Great, lovely. So now all I can see is my presentation. So please do shout at me if something has gone wrong, because I won't be able to see anybody waving or anything like that. So thank you. I'm really delighted to be invited today to talk to LEC colleagues about research that Becky Whittle and I, along with our research assistant, Jo Hickman-Dunn, have been doing over the last couple of years. So I want to talk to you about our project about birth stories. I wanted to say before I start that there is a content warning with this presentation. I'm talking about birth. There are lots of photographs in this presentation. There is nothing explicit in that you're not going to see any genitalia. Not of adults anyway, possibly of babies, I'm trying to remember. But there are lots of pictures of women in labour, of brand new newborn babies, and obviously conversations around birth can be very distressing to different people for all sorts of different reasons. So please, if you think that this is going to be difficult for you to listen to, then please do just sort of walk away for 15 minutes and look after yourself. So I wanted to talk to you about our project, which has taken place on Facebook. So the project has been encouraging people who have given birth to share their stories of having given birth within a Facebook group that we established for the project. The project, in a matter of a few weeks over the early summer of 2020, achieved about over 80 birth stories. We also received lots of really exciting photographs and other contributions by way of comments, discussions, poetry, links to blogs and other spaces where people had discussed their experiences of giving birth. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk particularly about the genesis of the project, how the project worked in practice, why we thought the project was important, and kind of in keeping with the theme, the next steps. There's going to therefore be less on the actual findings, but I'm really delighted. I would be really delighted to discuss these with colleagues at another point. So why this project? Where did this project come from? we were interested to reflect on the fact that there really isn't very much geography, not very much human geography around the concept of birth. Increasingly, there are bits of human geography around infancy. There is some work out there by people like Robin Longhurst on pregnancy, but actually the kind of, I was going to say moment of birth, but actually that very much is in contradiction with what I'm going to tell you later, but this kind of event of the birth has been something that hasn't been very much explored in human geography. Meanwhile, being a hugely significant area in family life. And actually what has been interesting about the timing of this project, that actually birth has been something that has been very much on the kind of news media agenda during COVID, because of the ongoing implications of infectious disease around the experience of giving birth. So our aim was to use stories of giving birth in the UK and discourse around these stories to understand experiences of success and failure as a product of the physical and social environment in which labour and delivery occurs. So we started out with this kind of neat set of research questions about how birth experiences are described and made sense of by those who've given birth, what environmental factors emerge as being important, to what extent do narratives of success and failure feature in birth stories, and to what extent do these perceptions of success and failure by people who have given birth map onto discourses around success and failure from a medicalized perspective. So I suppose that resonates quite well with what Phil was just talking about in terms of you know, that potential disjunction between kind of science and actually how we experience science and how we experience our lives. And then we were interested in exploring how the place of delivery might influence the experience of giving birth. And I think that our kind of motivation for this project is really well summed up by this quote from one of our participants, who said, "Women and babies deserve for the ending to be so much happier than it often is. They deserve so much more than simply an alive baby." So the sort of motivation that Becky and I had for this project was very much born out of a recognition or a feeling that the kind of medicalized nature of birth means that in medicine, but also in society more broadly, we see success around birth being pinned on, do the mother and the baby come out of the experience alive? Do the mother and baby come out of the experience with kind of minimal physical damage to themselves? And if so, if we can tick both those boxes, then that birth was a success. And actually, our own experiences, the experiences of people that we knew, that we'd read about, suggested that to us, actually, for most people giving birth, whether or not birth was a positive experience actually had much more to do with what happened during that time of labour, of delivery, of that kind of immediate moments after birth, and wasn't simply about, you know, 2 months down the line, are mum and baby healthy? So at the moment where we are in this project, we've actually kind of stagnated, or we've kind of focused in around that first research question: how are birth experiences described and made sense of by those who've given birth? What environmental factors emerge as being important to people during their birth stories? And that's kind of morphed a bit and become a focus in on work around the experience of storytelling in the context of birth. We've become really interested in the way that people who've given birth articulate their stories and the space in which they feel comfortable doing that. I'm in the process of writing a paper on everyday misogyny during childbirth, which I'll swing back to in a few minutes. We've made ongoing contributions in the form of things like blog posts. We've had our first academic paper from this project out using Facebookers method. And we've currently got a book contract, so a book due in at the end of the summer for Palgrave Macmillan, looking at women's agency and risk during childbirth. So that's where we are. So you'll see that this discourse, or the kind of language of success and failure, which was very much kind of underpinning our discussions at the outset, has kind of got lost along the way. I'm not sure, but we weren't finding that language coming up amongst our participants very much, and actually finding kind of other themes or other hooks that people were hanging their stories on. So that language has kind of gone by the wayside. Oh, there we go. So I first wanted to zoom in on this idea of Facebook as a platform for collecting stories, and then I'll go on to talk a bit more about using stories. So we found Facebook to be a really useful, a really interesting platform as a space for sharing birth stories. And this is kind of well illustrated by this quote from our participant Emma, who said, "Sorry, mine is long. It's the first time I've wrote anything down about the birth and found it quite cathartic. I've realised when birth doesn't go to plan, there aren't many spaces to discuss this. I fear making people uncomfortable or being negative or not focusing on the positives, that I had a wonderful, healthy baby. It's helped me reading about other people's experiences on this page. I gave birth 3 months ago and it's still quite raw." So why do we think that Facebook worked? Because certainly when we started talking to people about wanting to use Facebook as a platform, lots of people were raising concerns. And of course, we had our own concerns as we started to think about how this project was going to work in practice. But we found the things that worked really well about it were that it created an asynchronous discussion group. So by that we mean that it kind of did some of the things that you would want from a focus group. It created a space in which people could exchange opinions, in which people could share their ideas with other people who had similar experiences to them. They could bounce off each other. Ideas that one person had could catalyze responses from other people. So those kind of positive aspects of focus groups appeared in the Facebook group, but with the added benefit of the fact that it could happen at a time convenient to people. And particularly when you are looking at wanting to bring together a group of mothers to share their opinions, this was something we thought was really important, that there was no need for people to be in the same place, even a virtual place, at the same time. So it was really accessible. It fitted around people's schedules. People could fit in their contributions at whatever time helped them in whatever context, whilst they were feeding the baby in the middle of the night, when they sat down at a laptop, when their kids had gone to school, whatever helped. Obviously, it was ageographical, so there was no need for people to get to a specific space. And this was obviously fantastic for conducting research during COVID. This was a pure stroke of luck. We'd started planning the project. We'd landed on Facebook as a method long before we entered lockdown. So the timing was perfect. As well as the fact of the asynchronicity of the platform, we also found, or we felt, that it was a space in which women weren't worried about taking up space. By which I mean that if you have a group of 6 or 8 people in a focus group, if you're really lucky, they get on really well and everyone's chatty and everyone gets a chance to share their views. But it's perfectly possible, it's a well-known phenomenon, that people that are shy, people that don't like speaking up in groups, may well find it difficult to contribute in that context. They may well find that it's difficult to kind of get your elbow in and not want to take up time and make people listen to them. But you don't have that worry so much in a Facebook group, because lots of people can post all at once. You know that people can kind of scroll through your contribution if they're not interested in it. It provided an open form, so there was no specific word length, no specific media. People could post photos, they could not post photos, they could include video, people could link to outside resources like blogs. It was a personal space, and actually that was one of the critiques we've received, you know, from other colleagues when we've talked about doing this. One of the critiques, that the concerns we had for ourselves, that people were using their real names, people were using their profiles to engage. But actually, those of you that use Facebook groups will know that somebody clicking your name, someone clicking through to your profile from a group, doesn't get very much information, and certainly you can set your own Facebook profile to mean that somebody hasn't got lots of information. So it was personal in that people were interacting with other people using their real names, being able to see a photograph of what the person they were interacting with looked like. But on the other hand, people weren't interacting with people in the same room. People didn't have to look at other people whilst they kind of told personal information. So there was that sort of distancing that being on the internet gives as well. So Becky and I initially set up the page. We curated it quite, to say meaningfully, that's not quite the word I mean, but we put a lot of thought into how we were going to set up the group and what was going to be in the space before our participants arrived in the group. So we each shared our own or parts of our own birth stories. We each shared our photographs. We each commented and asked questions on each other's stories to kind of present a bit of a model of the kinds of interactions we were hoping people would have in that space once people arrived. As the project went along, we were really careful to engage frequently and to oversee the page. And contributors primarily posted stories and commented on each other's, but someone's used the space to ask questions or start discussions. And we sometimes ask specific questions of participants. I can see I'm running short on time. So we found stories to be really powerful because our participants could decide when to start and stop the story in terms of at what point of the process did they see their birth beginning and ending. And participants then had the space to reassemble events and unpack feelings and reflect carefully before they shared with the group. And this is a quote from one of our participants talking about her first birth story beginning a long time before she was a mother, and going on to kind of highlight this idea of birth stories starting at different points. So far from being retrospective, finalized narratives, our birth stories are dynamic, social and relational entities that shift and develop over time, and ways that can be profoundly healing to the women concerned. So why does this matter? The green quotes are quotes from our participants about the ways in which they felt that they weren't respected, they weren't given agency during the birth. And I just wanted to share very briefly with you, this baby here is a little baby called Malachi, and Malachi was born in a car park. And the reason that Malachi was born in a car park wasn't because his mother didn't realize she was in labor, but because when his mother called the maternity midwife-led unit where she was meant to have the baby, she was twice told not to come in because they didn't believe her that she was in labor. They weren't taking her own experiences seriously. They weren't listening to how she felt. They weren't kind of respecting her knowledge of what was going on. And that, again, is that kind of quote motivating our project. So where are we going next? We are hopefully going to take this project further. I'm in the process of applying for grants to allow us to hunt for some of the missing birth stories, to get some of those stories that weren't organically contributed to the project. And we can talk more about what that means in a minute. And we're really interested in getting some money to work with participants, to connect with maternity service providers and to communicate these findings, hopefully to make real change. And I appreciate I didn't really talk about what those findings were at all, but I know I'm running over time, so I'm going to stop there.
Thanks very much indeed, Nadia, for a very stimulating talk with a very interesting set of research, but also excellent job kind of pioneering new approaches to doing social science, which is fantastic. Do we have any quick questions for Nadia? Francis?
Yeah, let me just unmute myself. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Hi Nadia, thanks very much. That was really interesting. I'm interested in the Facebook thing as a method, because obviously you set it up as part of the project, but then it kind of takes on a life of its own. And how much do you feel any responsibility for? Does it keep going after the end of the project? Do you withdraw from it at that point? Do you keep it going? I'm just interested in how that, you know, whether that's bounded or not, or whether it just carries on forever.
Thanks. And I can see Jenny, I think, was asking a same question in the chat. So actually, we have kept it going. And we thought it might be a useful space to kind of get participant input as we analyse the data. And it has been really useful initially for things like, recently I said, we've got this contract for a book. Would people like to have their photographs included? If so, could you email me the JPEGs? Because Facebook is really rubbish. You know, the quality of the pictures won't reproduce well. So there's been that kind of low level of interaction. But what I'm really pleased about the fact we kept the page running is that I do plan to now use it again for doing something a bit more participatory in terms of working with our participants to try and collect more stories and slightly different stories.
Right, thanks.
Thanks, Nadia. Jane asked about the ethical consent. How did that work with Facebook?
Yeah, so it wasn't particularly smooth or straightforward, as you might imagine, but although there isn't a lot of research in social sciences using Facebook, there was at least some. So I can't claim to be pioneering in that sense. And that was really useful because it meant that I then could say to the ethics committee, well, look, this has been published in a peer-reviewed journal. So some other people have said it's okay. And this is, you know, this is why we think it's okay. And this is, oh dear. And this is what we're going to do to kind of look after ourselves and look after our participants. And really, I think as well, as part of that, I emphasised kind of my philosophy of ethics of research, that actually where we're working with adults who we have no reason to believe are particularly vulnerable in any way, you know, why shouldn't our participants be able to make decisions about sharing their name with others, about kind of having that kind of level of anonymity? And similarly, I know that the research, the ethics committee were concerned about us as researchers, and I was saying, well, you know, I've got a web page, I have to for my job, so people can find my email address and contact me through the internet if they want to anyway, you know it. But anyway, I'm really happy to talk more to people that are interested in using Facebook as method in detail. Thanks
very much indeed for that, Nadia. That's great. I think we better move on. So say thanks so much indeed. And there are say one or two more questions following on very much in the same vein in the chat. So do feel free to answer them as we go along. So if we move on, the next talk we have is Shane Rothwell. Tell us something a bit more about the Refocus project, looking at phosphorus in the food system. So over to you, Shane.
Thank you, Oliver. Can you see the presentation?
That looks good. Yep.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'm going to speak to you about Refocus, a project I've been working on the last 3.5 years. Myself, Kirsty Forber and Paul Withers, who's the PI, we're the Lancaster team. Kirsty should have been sharing this presentation with me today, but unfortunately she can't make it, so I'm presenting the work today. The title of our presentation is Stepping Through Scales of Food System Phosphorus Management. Why phosphorus? Well, it is intrinsic to our food systems. It's fundamental to the biology of life. We need to eat it to survive. It's intrinsic to our food production for our crops and for our livestock. The two main issues with how we manage phosphorus, if you look at this, mismanage it in environment, it's eutrophication in fresh waters. The other issue that we have with phosphorus is it is a finite resource. We mine phosphorus. We have no phosphorus reserves of our own, so we're entirely reliant on importing phosphorus into our country as fertilizers and animal feeds and food to meet our food system demand. Sorry, it's not advancing. There we go. So project scope. So really what we've done is we've examined how we manage phosphorus in our food system at different scales.
Sorry to break in, but you're not sharing at the moment.
Am I not? Okay, right. Is that good?
That's good. That's great.
Excellent. Okay. So scale's been really critical to what we've done. So we've examined how we manage phosphorus in our food system at the national scale, also at the regional scale, so at the NUTS1 regional scale that we can see here, but also at the catchment scale as well. So we've had 3 main study catchments. They've been the Upper Bann in Northern Ireland. There is a Y catchment that straddles the English and the Welsh border, and then the Upper Welland catchment in Leicestershire and Rutland. And really, it's about safeguarding future food security, but also the environmental impact of the stewardship of that phosphorus we've got in our food system as well. So today, we're going to have some very brief project highlights at these different scales. I say very brief. We're going to show some examples of phosphorus food system models that we've done. They will look quite intimidating and complicated. Please don't be too put off by them. I will draw out the main points of what we're trying to say with those, but we won't go into any detail. But then what we will do is we will look at the next steps. So a lot of the work that we have done has been in collaboration with policymakers and stakeholders concerned with managing phosphorus at those different scales. So based on the evidence and the work that we've done, what are the next steps moving forward with regard to phosphorus management and the particular challenges that come with managing phosphorus in our food system. So I'm going to go straight into a UK food system phosphorus flow model. It's going to look quite intimidating, but it's there to make a point, and I'll draw out the main point. So this is essentially, as I said, a model of all the phosphorus that flows through our food system. We have the different boxes, the different sectors of the food system. Agriculture's up here, consumption and waste management is down here, and then we have all the imports, exports, and flows of phosphorus. This was done in collaboration with DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and the AIC. And really, the first point I want to make is how inefficient our food system is. So we are reliant on importing phosphorus in fertilizers, foods, and feeds to meet our food system demand. So if we look at how much phosphorus we import, and then how much of that actually ends up in the food that we eat, food and consumption, or phosphorus that ends up in commodities that we can export, i.e. more animal food, feed, or fertilizers, we're only about 43% efficient. So there aren't many businesses or systems out there that can manage to survive at this level. What we can also immediately see with this model, so it's a Sankey style diagram, and the width of the arrows or the flows is proportional to the size of that flow. We can actually see we're quite a livestock dominated food system. So we import a lot of animal feed, but certainly internally, the phosphorus contained in our livestock manures is by far the largest flow that we have internally, and also livestock feed as well. So very much a livestock dominated food system with regard to phosphorus. This model has highlighted 3 key areas of inefficiency and loss within this system. The first one here, so this box, this process here, this is essentially the agricultural soil surface in the UK. And what we can see here is we have annual surplus accumulation of phosphorus. So we add more phosphorus to our agricultural soil surface in fertilizers and manures. We add more than we actually take off in the crops and the grass that we grow. That is somewhere in the region of 90,000 tons of elemental phosphorus a year, every year. That's equivalent to about 7 or 8 kilograms per hectare across our managed agricultural. So that's probably the largest point of inefficiency that we have in our food. This has been going on for decades. Another key area of inefficiency is in our waste management system. Still, lots of phosphorus is ending up locked up in landfill and also in construction materials, ashes and aggregate. Somewhere around about 20,000 tons of elemental P is lost to landfill and construction materials. And the environmental impact as well of the poor stewardship is what is lost to our fresh and coastal water bodies. So somewhere around about 26,000 tons of elemental P every year are lost from our national food system to our fresh waters. In total, these 3 areas of loss and inefficiency equal about 3/4 of the equivalent to 3/4 of all the phosphorus we import in our food system. So what this inefficiency means is fundamentally we end up with too much P in our system. We need to import lots of P because we are so inefficient, and then that's why fundamentally we have the environmental impact. So this needs system level change. So a lot of the work that's done to mitigate the environmental impact of phosphorus on our environment is essentially trying to plug the gaps. This is very much more a system level understanding of where the phosphorus is coming from and where the key inefficiencies are. Changing scale a little bit. So we did the same piece of work for the Northern Ireland food system. This was actually the first model that we developed. And so it's exactly the same principle, and Northern Ireland really truly is dominated by livestock. By far the biggest import of phosphorus into their food system is in animal feed, and the livestock associated phosphorus flows completely dominate the food system. And there are huge environmental issues with phosphorus and eutrophication over there. So it's an animal feed import, and then it's cattle storage that's the key issue. That's the key issue that I have. What our work has done there really is, so this work was done in collaboration with stakeholders over there, with the relevant industry actors in each of the different processes. And really what this allowed people to do, because they were involved, was about acceptance of the issue. So quite a political issue over in Northern Ireland, a lot of denial. Agriculture is a very big part of their economy, relatively big part of their economy. What this piece of work has done is actually allowed people to accept they are part of the issue and need to be part of the solution. So it's been a really key step for moving forward in Northern Ireland, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So again, to reduce the environmental impact of phosphorus in the food system in Northern Ireland, it needs system level change. It's no longer about plugging the gaps. It is, how do you tackle these major imports of phosphorus into the system that are way above what the system can have. And changing scale again. So we're now moving down to the catchment scale. This is one of our 3 study catchments. I'm just going to give you the example of the River Wye catchment. The River Wye catchment in particular at the moment is receiving a lot of media attention, quite a politically charged and emotional set of situations down there with regard to water quality. And there's a very well publicised 100-mile long algal bloom in the Wye last year. So we did a similar sort of piece of work, modelling the phosphorus flows within the catchment. And again, this is another example of a very much a livestock dominated system within the catchment. So most of the phosphorus that's coming into the catchment area is coming in as livestock feed. And actually, the dominant livestock agriculture in the Wye catchment is poultry. It's broiler production for meat. But livestock dominate the flows, in particular the manure. And this means there's a huge local surplus of phosphorus because there's so much feed coming in. There's a huge amount of phosphorus in manure produced, but nowhere near as much has been taken off in the crops and the grass. So actually, just within the Wye catchment area, there's potentially somewhere around about 3,000 tonnes per year and elemental P accumulating in the soils. That's equivalent to about 17 tonnes per hectare across their managed agricultural surface. It's about 3 times the national average. This has been going on for decades, so it's a really P-saturated environment. Some of the other work that we've done, again, not going into too much detail, but the particular biogeochemistry of the soils they have there means they can't actually hold on to this amount of phosphorus. So this is, just very briefly, these are the Wye sandy soils here, and this is essentially, it's a measure of how much phosphorus those soils can hold. So they have a very low capacity to hold on to phosphorus, and this is a measure of how saturated that capacity is, if you like. So really, the local situation, the huge surplus, historic over-application, and the particular biogeochemistry that they have really is a phosphorus perfect storm. It's a very difficult area to manage phosphorus in, particularly if you want to produce intensive agriculture. So again, one of the key aspects of this piece of work was having stakeholder input into this model and feeding it back, and really about acceptance of what the issue is. So no more finger pointing to different sectors, different industries. Everyone within this system is part of the problem and needs to be part of the solution. So again, I'm banging home the point that it's system level change that's needed. There's a lot of good work that goes on in the catchment, looking at riparian buffer strips and working with farmers to manage incidental losses, which is really great, but that is still just plugging the gaps. It's system level change that's needed. How do you alter or manage these flows to reduce the environmental impact? Just really to drive home the point about livestock, this is a slightly different piece of work, but just looking at phosphorus pressures at the regional scale. So looking at the NUTS1 regional scale, and what we have on this figure here is the agricultural surplus that we were talking about. So the deeper red colours are where we have the much higher surplus, and actually some of the areas, more arable areas, were actually slightly in phosphorus drawdown. But we can see, so the classic east-west spread. So in the west of the country, where we have the highest livestock densities, where we have the highest national surplus. So regionally, agricultural surpluses are really driven by livestock population, and some of the arable areas are actually in P drawdown. They're actually off taking more phosphorus in their crops than they are applying as manure. Why is this important? Why am I banging on about surplus? Well, what we've managed to do with the Refocus project is actually we've demonstrated there's a very clear relationship between the phosphorus pressure at the regional scale and how much of that phosphorus is ending up in the water. What we have here with these 3 figures is this one on the right. This is the agricultural surplus, which is this data over here. What we have here is actually the human P pressure. So this is the phosphorus that's essentially been loaded into the catchment or into the region from the food we consume, the detergents that we use. And when you combine those 2 things together, we have what we call a NAPI, or a net anthropogenic phosphorus input. But essentially, it's a measure of the pressure of phosphorus within that region. And what we have on the y-axis here is actually a measure or a monitored quantification of the phosphorus flux to our watercourses. And there's a very clear relationship between agricultural surplus and human P pressure and how much is actually ending up in our watercourses. So this is a really critical piece of understanding, people to get their heads around, that actually pressuring the landscape is critical to the environmental impact. Another, very briefly, another piece of work that we've done. So these surpluses that we're talking about have been happening for decades and decades, most of the post-war, post-Second World War period. There's these huge reserves of phosphorus built up in our agricultural soils. We use the term legacy phosphorus to describe this, and it's often or usually been ignored. So we had the question of, could this legacy phosphorus form part of our solution in terms of providing phosphorus for our crops to grow? So we took some soil from our three catchments, the Upper Barn, the Welland catchment and the Wide catchment. And what we're looking at here is a figure of essentially all the phosphorus that's in the soil. So the green bit and the dotted bit together is the total elemental P that's in the soil. The little green bit at the top is the Olsen P measurement. So those of you not of an agronomic mind, the Olsen P measurement, if you were a farmer, you sent away some soil for analysis, these are the numbers that you get back that told you how much phosphorus you had in your soil that was available to your crops. This is a tiny fraction of the total pool that's in the soil. So the question we fundamentally had was, can we tap into some of this legacy P or could it be agronomically useful? So we set up a trial at the Lancaster Environment Centre to try and answer that question. And again, I'm not going into any detail, but our findings would suggest that depending on the status, so each of these samples is a different field, legacy P reserves could supply anywhere between 2 and 20 years worth of phosphorus, depending on the soil P status. So the question, is legacy P potentially helpful? Our data would say yes, it is. We can tap into those legacy P reserves. So the focus of this talk really is about the next steps. So I'll just give you a few examples now of some of the next steps that are happening at these different scales that we've worked at. If we start in the River Wye, so I said that the work that we did is really all along it's been about engaging with the relevant stakeholders working within the catchment, and we took all our data and analysis away, and then we've been busy going back, speaking to people, and really presenting our findings to these key different groups. So we've done farmer meetings, we've done agronomy meetings, catchment partnerships that have included producers, retailers, the major supermarkets, the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, and there's a lot of activity down there, a lot of catchment working partnerships and NGOs, because it's a very politically sensitive area at the moment, and quite a lot of polarized opinions down there on how things should change to move forward, and so a lot of media coverage. What we've been able to do is actually just let people understand why managing phosphorus in this particular region is a particular challenge. So I say no more finger pointing, no more blaming, just this is the system level problem. So really what we've managed to do is get acceptance and responsibility. So we're galvanizing the stakeholders down there actually into action planning and to reduce the pressure on the landscape down there. Just a couple of quick examples there. So the major poultry producers who actually produce most of the manure that's pressuring the landscape, they are looking at ways of managing their phosphorus better. And there are farmer networks looking at reducing P input. Next steps, putting words into practice. Northern Ireland, so going up to the regional scale, there's a government report just been submitted to the Minister for Agriculture that uses our findings as the basis for evidence for asking the question, how are they going to address the surplus that they have down there? We're expecting major funding for that. Again, another government report that went in last year that our substance flow analysis was key to, and our social science partners in Leeds were involved in some behavioural analysis of a soil nutrient, wide scale soil nutrient health analysis, and there's now a £35 million fund being awarded that Leeds are still going to be part of. And at the national scale, so this is the last slide now. This is hot off the press. This was released yesterday. This is the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee report into the water quality in our rivers. The refocused evidence featured extensively in this report, and on the back of our recommendations, this report is suggesting that DEFRA need to actually undertake 5 yearly appraisals of nutrient flows in every major catchment in England. One of the key challenges we had with particularly the catchment scale was with regard to data. So the quality of the monitoring that's happening at the moment by the Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales is not good enough to answer some of the questions that we need to answer. So again, this report recommends that there is actually increased funding now for the Environment Agency and water quality monitoring can improve. And then finally, our own piece of work, which hopefully should be published in the next couple of weeks. So we are producing a UK phosphorus transformation strategy towards a circular UK food system. So this is the UK's first comprehensive national phosphorus transformation strategy. Publication is pending, and this has been completed by our colleagues in UTS, Sydney, Dana and Brent. Really, this is on the back of key national interviews and surveys. And then late last year, we held a national stakeholder workshop where we fed back all our findings. And really, it's about recommending what the next steps are to the different food system sectors in Africa. And the three main points that we make is each sector needs to make a phosphorus sustainability action plan. They need to identify where they can contribute to a phosphorus transition pathway with indicators of success. And then we're suggesting the UK probably needs a multi-actor platform to come together to identify targets and strategies for how we manage nutrients across the UK more efficiently. So thank you very much. And there's a nice picture there. It's nice to see that because that's the time when we could actually all get together and speak in person. So I'll finish there. Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks very much indeed, Shane. Thanks for a great overview of the Refocus project, and it's great to see this kind of science feeding into policy. That's excellent. We're running a little short of time for questions, but I've just asked one quickly. The first question here from Malika, I think it was, asking about much of the focus is on the kind of biophysical and chemically focused work. What about the social and cultural approaches to managing phosphorus?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. And say Leeds University have they've run the social science work package. So work package 2 was a social science work package. That work has been done at the catchment scale and at the regional scale. So another postdoc in Leeds, Chris Line, he's now back over in Canada. So he did a particular piece of work in 2 of the catchments. And actually, I actually helped out with the interview. So as a physical scientist, it was a really nice piece of work for me to be involved with. So we visited farms in the 2 different catchments, and I was actually involved in the social science interviews with those farmers. So a true, I would say, multidisciplinary piece of work. So I have focused on Lancaster's work, which is the more natural science. But yeah, social sciences was an equally big component of what we've done.
Thank you very much. That's great to see, and I say the number of comments coming through on the chat, kind of highlighting some of the impact that this research is having, which is great to see. So can I forward you to the chat to address any other questions people raise?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. Yeah, anytime. That's fine.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
So if we move on, so next up, before the break, we have Malika Mezeli to talk a little bit about the legacy of the STARS Centre for Doctoral Training. So, Malika.
I apologise. It's the first bit of work I've done since going on adoption leave about 6 weeks ago. It's been quite an interesting experience, but I thank you in advance for your time and attention. So I'm going to be talking about building a legacy for STARS Source Training and Research Studentships, which I am the Legacy Fellow. Been quiet for about an hour and now he's gone into turbo drive. I'm sorry. So this is I'm Legacy Fellow on this, but I'm also supported quite a lot by Olivia Lawrenson, who's been the STARS CDT Administrator since 2014, and as well as Phil Haygarth, who's the STARS Director. So STARS CDT is a unique CDT aimed to increase the representation of soil science graduates in the UK. NERC offered 41 soils-based PhD programmes, and we expect 37 to complete, with some dropping out for various reasons. Now, the CDT supported a cross-institute participation, which allowed a sharing of resources, both human and physical, and promoting a cross-disciplinary research environment. As you can see, we had 4 research institutes, 4 universities across the UK, and part of the STARS CDT. And it's a centralised funding that also really supported a range of outside training and work with government and industry partners, sort of trying to produce to help train STARS soils graduates. I'm really sorry, this is quite tricky. And we had certain placements of our students with DEFRA, Kew Gardens and the House of Lords. Moving on, let's try that. Here we go. So STARS is able to facilitate graduates with the skill set and networks required for the next generation of soil scientists to help achieve the 2030 sustainability goals. Appreciate that soil science is a really interdisciplinary sort of work, and to do anything which has real impact, we do need to appreciate what's going on in other research environments and have a real collection of different skills. But often the more standard PhD model allows or supports more detailed, focused work, which ignores more what's going on around to be able to tackle these bigger issues. And the STARS CDT addressed these with overall soil science skills, cohort building, which also lent itself to long-term networks between students and the staff and management board associated with STARS, generic skills training, and also life after the PhD, which legacy is obviously a big part of. So to remain ambitious and forward-focused, our legacy project bring together the resources that we produced, which consisted of over 40 films on the 4 research areas which the CDT offered, and also to build on the relationships forged into STARS and into the broader soil community. And we're going to make sure that all these resources are accessible to those outside of STARS and also outside of the research community. And this is trying to sort of increase our ability to try and tackle some of these wider issues, that it should be this knowledge, this information, these networks should be open to everybody. So the STARS legacy project commitments, sort of 6 main ones of these. Yeah. The purpose of STARS legacy is to continue the development of a community of PhD students within the focus areas of the STARS and ensure maximum impact of this investment made by NERC and BBSRC. The end of last year, I think it was October, it came out in the European Journal of Soil Science with a special STARS issue, which have got a lot of research publications in from STARS students, but also the management team and also a student worked to produce a lead paper in there, which is sort of describing how the management board were able to put together the CDT, some issues that came up, and also what I'm trying to do in legacy. STARS Legacy Committee, to try to support some of my EDI ambitions, I've actually decided to keep this as a continuing process and really not formalise much until the end of the project. And that was to allow us for diversity of personalities and ambitions. Oh, I don't know. Maybe me. And the website is there to host training materials, a sort of curriculum, and make that again available outside of the community as well, and to make sure that all the resources that we've amassed during this this few years of training will be accessible after completion. And the policy knowledge exchange symposium. So a lot of these projects have been held up by COVID. This has been one of them. The Global Soils Summer School. So this is again to sort of try to formalise the training, diverse training that was offered by the STARS CDT, and move it forward so it's available online, but also available on an ad hoc basis to cross-disciplinary postgraduate students who may or may not be working directly in soils, but maybe need some soils knowledge delivered by soils experts that will help improve their work and research. So STARS overall has hosted about 4 conferences. These have been student-led, which really allowed to increase experience as well within those STARS PhD students. And then as the legacy, since that started, we've hosted 2 conferences, a short one online, another one online because of continuing COVID complications. And we're actually going to be having a presence, it's a fringe event at the World Congress of Soil Science in 2022, which we did hope was going to be in person, but may not be. But I think it's the conferences that, as far as I've taken the project, I think I've been most excited about, but I think have led to the most impact. So the STARS Legacy Autumn Conference saw us in context. This was a 4-day online event, and I tried to limit the research talks in favour of keynote talks, which reflected on and attempted to contextualise our practice. So trying to address the timeline as which these PhD students were at, near completion or after completion, and then they already had become experts within a very restricted field, but maybe they didn't really know where that sat in, and maybe they didn't know, or maybe we're not given the space to question the knowledge that we think we have. And I wanted to create a diverse space for that to happen. And this was also helped with professionally facilitated workshops to support that process. This is absolute carnage in the background, and I do apologise. These illustrations, which I'm just going to use just to talk about this conference because it wasn't standard, and I've been really, I think some of the outcomes of this, some have been surprising. Surprising outcomes of the conference, but also I think the experiences that people had during that week as well were quite new, and we had really positive feedback. So we commissioned Holly McKelvey, illustrator, to illustrate what was going on in these talks. And I think as well, as opposed to our abstracts that you might get from a soil science conference or research papers, I think just by having these illustrations, a different representation of this information was very helpful, actually, to detailing to what was going on or what also might happen, and to pick out some of the key themes that did come up. So we had our limited research talks, just a morning of them. And then we had a section which was trying to work towards a tangible output of the effects of predicted climate change scenarios on soils. Now, this really sort of built upon this more cross-disciplinary cohorts that we have in soil science that was allowed by the STARS CDT. And by having this broad sector of knowledge across the students, the graduates and the staff, we're able to tackle some really complex questions like this. We've carried on meeting. I've been really pleased with the retention of the participants in this potential paper. And we continue to be really challenged and working together and sharing what we know, and mostly identifying what we don't really know. We'll sort of see how that progresses as we move on. Sorry, I've kind of skipped a slide. This all the keynote speakers that I brought in, we tried to not talk directly about their research, but maybe sort of give them time to reflect on parts of their research. And we had, for example, Nigel talking about phosphorus and colonialism. Nigel Clark from the department, we had Jess Davis, and we had Judith as well from Canada. And one of the great things about being online was that we were able to get Judith talking from Canada on a living soil lab. We were able to get Diana Wall call in from the US, who's a very respected soil scientist herself in her own right, but may have been difficult actually to get to a physical meetup. So maybe there was some pros and cons to that actually. So we've got as I saw Legacy, we have these sort of 6 main deliverables that we have to achieve, but as well as the reason why it's so exciting or why it's so difficult to study and sort of difficult to address some of the issues around it, because it's a very heterogeneous space. We also often look at the pore space within this. So what's happening within these gaps? And that's often what is the most exciting place within the soil environment, where most biophysical chemical interactions occur. And I've been really excited to see what's happened within the pore space of these projects, actually. And one thing that's come out of this is a statement of intent, which a lot of the students and the STARS graduates have self-initiated and come out and want us to support them in this. A lot of this came from the conference, or what we sort of instigated in the conference, the types of reflections, the type of extended reading. Now, this statement of intent is meant as a public declaration of commitment to best practice in soil science, and it'll consist of a series of promises that the signatories make to themselves and the community. And it's to be a document that the practitioner can refer to themselves and others to support the continued best practice, to communicate ideals, aspirations and commitments in a non-confrontational way. I hope you can appreciate that often it's quite difficult when you've got ECRs and postgraduate positions, often maybe the only person in their lab with their PI, maybe the only person of colour, maybe the only woman, maybe the only person representing the LGBTQ. Also maybe not anyone that's actually represented by these groups, but actually someone that thinks that these things are important to have decolonial practice within what we do, have anti-racial practice in what we do, and to have a more heterogeneous environment that reflects the soil. We've been really supported by Phil with pushing this forward, and we're actually going to be presenting this pledge at the Glasgow World Congress of Soil Science in 2022 in the summer. What a rambly talk. I do apologise, but I really thank you for the opportunity to try to work and be a mum at the same time, which I realise is maybe it's impossible. But thanks very much for listening.
Thanks very much indeed, Malika. It's great to see what's been going on, as it were, and it's great that there is this focus on legacy, you know, and taking these things forward and keeping the momentum going, as it were, from these activities. And well done on the, you know, keeping control of things on the domestic side at the same time. It's a, you know, good job.
Thanks from me to Nadia, Oliver, Shane, Malika, and our conference audience for a great first session of Lancaster Environment Centre's Next Steps in Research Winter Conference 2022, as well as a huge thanks to you for watching. Don't forget to join our session 2 video, where we'll be looking at the next steps that lie ahead for some of our researchers as they develop their projects. And our keynote from Dr. Paul Young is also still to come. That will be uploaded as a LEC seminar in the LEC seminar playlist. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you know when all of those videos go live. Thanks again from me, Ali Burkitt, here at Lancaster Environment Centre, Lancaster University.